The science culture talk will be given by Jayashree Ratnam, Dr. Jayashree Ratnam. Jayashree is a community and ecosystems ecologist with a focus on tropical savanna and forest ecosystems. Through a PhD at Syracuse University and then postdoctoral positions at Colorado State University and the University of Leeds, she's worked extensively in Africa and in Asia, studying these ecosystems on a continental scale. Over the past decade, her work has focused on defining and classifying Asian savannas, their evolutionary history, their functional ecology, and conservation status. She has been at NCBS for over 10 years, and for the past 6, she has driven our wildlife and biology conservation program that I mentioned in my opening remarks, first as its associate director, and now she heads this program.
Okay, good evening, everybody from Bangalore, India, and thank you all for joining us today. So what I'm going to be talking to you all today about is a capacity building initiative for conservation science that has been ongoing at NCBS since 2004, and you've heard both Jitu and Uma talk about it already. Now, in its 17th year, a number of individuals and organizations have contributed to make this program possible. So before I jump into it, I'd like to begin by thanking them. First, our funders, whose generous contributions allow us to run the program. The founding individuals and organizations. It was a very unusual combination of conservation and molecular biologists who decided to get together and found this program. And likewise, there were academic institutions and NGO partners who collaborated and agreed to do what it took to get the program started. And our deepest thanks go to all of them. And last but not the least, the amazing network of faculty and resource people who have contributed to this program over the past decade and a half. Sadly, too many to name in the short time that I have, but I should say that without them, this program would simply not be possible. And thanks to all of them. So specifically, what I'm going to talk about today is a master's program in wildlife biology and conservation. And it is a partnership between an academic institution and NGO partners. And for those of you who don't know, NGO stands for non-government organization. And basically, I think in the West, it's more commonly referred to as not-for-profits. And at least in our sector, good examples or familiar ones are things like the Wildlife Conservation Society or Conservation International. Now, before I go into the program itself, let me set the context for you. And you've heard a little bit about it from both Jitu and Uma, but just to reiterate, the context is simply that, something we're all familiar with, but India is a mega diverse nation. Within its boundaries, there are 4 of Earth's biodiversity hotspots. It is also home to Earth's last viable populations of such heritage fauna as the Asian elephant, the tiger, and the Indian rhinoceros. But at the same time, only 5% of India's land area falls in protected areas, which pretty much means that all of that magnificent wildlife is outside those protected areas, where it is under siege from a human population of 1.3 billion people and growing, and aggressive development. So the conservation challenges that we face as a country and on behalf of all this magnificent wildlife are complex, and it's going to be very challenging, but that brings us to the very heart of the problem. At the same time, in India, we have a paucity of well-trained conservation professionals to steward and scientifically conserve this magnificent natural heritage. So there is an urgent need to enhance capacity in this field. So why is there this lack of capacity? Well, it's partly historical. Wildlife biology and conservation are poorly emphasized disciplines in the Indian education sector, all the way from primary to higher education. Of relevance to building professional capacity in this field, there's a very limited number of places where you can go out and get a higher degree in this field, a really good one. And finally, alongside this, there's a lack of clear employment opportunities, which acts as both a deterrent and a constraint. Yeah. So let's just maybe compare this with some countries in the West. Let's think about the United States, where wildlife biology and conservation is a well-established discipline. It's been there for decades. There are multiple universities with departments of wildlife biology and conservation, several in every state. So that's, more than 100, definitely more than 100 such departments across the United States. In contrast, in India, if you were to look, there'd be maybe 3 or 4 groups that would, qualify to be departments. If you're a student looking to do a master's program in wildlife or biodiversity conservation here in the United States, immediately you have 300 plus, programs to apply to. In the United Kingdom, arguably much smaller, you still have 80 plus programs to apply to. In India, 15 plus as of 2020, and back in 2004 when this program started, there were even fewer. And it was in this context, to address this lacuna, that the master's program in wildlife biology and conservation was started at NCBS in 2004 with a mission to build professional capacity for wildlife and ecosystem conservation in India through a rigorous, high-quality postgraduate training program, and to facilitate, through the work of our graduates, evidence-based, scientific conservation of wildlife and the natural ecosystem. Now, because our goal was for our students to be cognizant with both the science and the practice of conservation, by definition, then, we had to have a very interdisciplinary program that addressed both the theory and the practice. Yeah. So, for example, you had to have such fundamental disciplines as ecology, evolution, population and community ecology, and statistics, which are the realm of, a standard scientific degree. But at the same time, we had to go much further and enter other areas like environmental law and policy, social science, environmental history, eco-philosophy. In effect, we needed a diversity of experts. And basically, no single institution was going to have all these experts. So the way we then solved this problem was to reach out to a network of support faculty and practitioners from across academia and the NGO sector. And in this little diagram here, what I've got for you is all the people, all the organizations that partner and collaborate with NCBS in this program. And the green arrows are the not-for-profits, so non-government organizations, and the red ones are academic institutions. So as you can see, and it is this fantastic network that I was talking about earlier and saying to you that without these institutions and the people in them, you would not be able to deliver our program. Now, in terms of the student experience itself, the program believes in a pedagogy of immersive field-based learning, and we try to spend as much time as we can out there in the field, understanding the wildlife and the natural ecosystems that we conserve, and we try to reach a diversity of ecosystems across the country. Now, obviously, the learning experience provided by such by such trips is very rich because it is experiential. However, it actually goes much deeper than that. These deep experiences cement in us a sense of commitment and a deep passion for the wildlife and the ecosystems that we are trying to conserve. And that is actually fundamentally important in this field. Conservation is a frustrating field. It is, there are far more failures than there are successes. And it is much easier, that much easier to persist if you're truly passionate and really committed to what you're trying to do. And so now the program, at the end of the program, it culminates in individual student research projects. And as you can guess from our training, the student projects end up being pretty diverse, such as this study on wild ungulates in the high altitude Trans-Himalaya, or this one looking at coral reef diseases in the Lakshadweep Islands. Okay, so 2004 to 2020, 16 years later, where are we? What do the numbers look like? From 2004 to 2014, we took in 15 students every 2 years, Indian nationals. And I think it's important to note that all our students come in on full fellowships. This is really important because that's what makes it possible for a lot of people to actually attend such a program. In 2016, the program opened its doors to international students and added 2 additional places for students from developing countries in South, Southeast, and Central Asia. Now, I'd like to take a moment to say that this was actually an important step in the development of the program. Basically, 10 years in, we had developed a lot of expertise and capacity all in one place. And we felt that it was important to try and increase the reach of our program and its impact by taking it out to developing countries in Asia, in many of which students would not have the option to train in such a high quality program. And in order to make sure that the impact from doing this actually goes back to these home countries, we mandate that our international students actually go back to their home countries to do their final thesis project. So now, as of 2020, we have 103 graduates, a further 16 in training. As of a few weeks ago, we've just recruited 17 new students. And there they are, 103 graduates and counting. And their research sites have spanned right across India. And now we're slowly spreading further out into Asia with the international students who joined our program. And student theses are diverse. They examine different species, ecosystems, and study different kinds of problems. As you can see from this little montage here, tropical forests, grasslands, rivers, coral reefs. Importantly, a lot of these projects end up contributing to the published literature, and therefore they also contribute to knowledge generation in the field. What about our longer term impact? What about our alumni, the students who graduate from our program? What are they doing? Well, after they complete their masters, about 50% of the students go on to join the workforce in conservation science and practice. But about 50% go on to do doctoral degrees. And what is amazing is that most of them, an overwhelming majority, choose to do their doctoral research on Indian wildlife and ecosystems, after which they then join the workforce. And if we look at the workforce and see what our graduates are doing, well, about 90% of them end up in the NGO sector doing research, action, and outreach for conservation. Some of them end up in conservation journalism. Some have joined the forest department, and some are independent researchers. About 5% join academic and research institutions, and about 5% end up leaving the field, a relatively low attrition rate. Our graduates, our alumni, between them have today contributed over 240 peer-reviewed publications on India's wildlife, ecosystems, and conservation issues. So a significant body of knowledge on our in this field. They've also contributed over 200 popular articles, policy pieces, and science journalistic pieces. Importantly, many of our alumni are engaged in conservation action on the ground, and their research, advocacy, litigation, and initiatives in local communities have either led or facilitated some real on-the-ground interventions for conservation. And we saw one such example in that critical wildlife underpass under National Highway 7. A lot of the litigation and engagement with the government for that highway was done by alumni from our institution. Other examples, in southeastern India, work by an alumnus has resulted, both the data that he provided as well as his work with the forest department has resulted in an upgrading of a wildlife sanctuary to a tiger reserve, establishment of community conservation areas for wildlife conservation and livelihood generation in 3 different parts of the country, the Western Himalaya, Northeastern India, and Peninsula Western India, mitigation actions for human-wildlife conflicts in Northeastern India and in Southern India, and finally, initiatives with fishers and citizens for sustainable fisheries, in-season fish on the eastern coast, and know your fish on the western coast. And this is not all of it, but just a set of examples. Finally, our earliest alumni, 12 years later, where are they? Well, they're in leadership positions in NGOs, faculty positions in some of the best academic institutions in the country. Some of them have nucleated new conservation NGOs, and others are independent. So that's an overview of what the program has done and achieved in the time since it began. And so what have we learned? Well, I think the big take home for us here at NCBS is that the academic NGO partnership has been vital to the outcomes of our program. And actually, this is not at all surprising. Recall that I told you that wildlife biology and conservation is not well developed in the academic sector in India. Ergo, some of our best professionals in the field are all outside in the NGO sector. And by collaborating with the sector, we basically bring in some of the top experts and professionals into the program and engaging with teaching our students. And this has diverse and really interesting learning outcomes for our students. At the same time, us being located in a research institution emphasizes for students every day the importance of doing rigorous and high quality science. So I think the combination, although serendipitous, has worked out really well. The partnership with the NGO sector has also had another very pragmatic outcome, which is that many of our graduates end up getting employed in these same conservation NGOs that also engage with our program. So in a field where jobs are hard to come by, you end up having better employment opportunities and a greater chance that you will persist in the field. And as you can see, that has had visible gains for conservation research and action in India. So at this point, I want to sit back and think a little bit of what we've done here. And I think that what we have done here is a relatively unusual model in higher education. So typically, if you think about it, academia, industry, or academia NGO collaborations, of course they do occur, but typically they occur for the translation of research from the academic environment into end products or applications in the real world. Rarely do these collaborations occur for the purpose of higher education, except of course in the field of medicine, where historically clinical practitioners have routinely also taught in medical schools. But what our experience and the outcomes after 16 years suggest to us that such a model can be really useful, and it can result in some really good outcomes, learning outcomes. And as such, we think that it could be really applicable and important for a number of applied disciplines out there where such collaborations can lead to interesting learning outcomes that can be transformative for higher education in that field. So for us, the take home from this is that academia really needs to open out from its silos and be more open and flexible about who they think can and should teach in higher education, as well as think about learning outcomes that have real applications in the world out there. And of course, I just want to make one more point. Another important thing that we've learned after all this time is that it takes time. It takes time for capacity building to translate into impact in the field. From our program, 10 plus years for individuals to gain expertise, establish, and reach positions where they can be change makers. And for us, the message there is that it's really important for us to support our alumni post-graduation and through to establishment. So our engagement with them only begins with the master's program. So where next? Well, we've had a lot of time to think about this now. And for us at the master's program, given what we've done with the master's program, it seems to us that what we would now like to do is to diversify our activities in the conservation, education, and action space through a multi-partner consortium for conservation. And we are working actively towards trying to initiate this and raise the funding for the same. At the same time, I think what the program has done, which Jitu sort of mentioned when he introduced, is that it has basically led to several other collaborative initiatives in NCPS. And I want to talk about another example of a collaboration between academia and the NGO sector. And this is a really interesting initiative called the Bangalore Sustainability Forum, which has started in the past year and a half. And it is a collaboration between academia, NGOs, and citizen groups. And importantly, it is across knowledge domains. And we know that that's really something that's very difficult to do. But the idea is that very many completely different types of groups are trying to work together in the context of the UN SDG goals to work towards ecological resilience and sustainability of the natural resources of the greater Bangalore urban region. So watch this space. I don't know whether, where all of these programs will go, but I hope that in 10 years we'll have nice stories to tell you about them. I think I've run out of time here, so I'll take questions. I'll stop with that.
Thanks a lot, Jayashree. That was a great talk. It is clear that this program has already had a big impact in its first 12 years, and I'm sure it will continue to do so. In the interest of time, I am going to ask some of the questions that have come in. Starting with, can you tell us a little bit about the admission process to the program? What's required? How are applicants evaluated? And what are the costs for participating in the program?
Oh. Like as I mentioned, first let me address the cost. As I mentioned, this program is all students have full fellowships to attend it. So it actually does not cost a student anything to attend the program. In terms of the admission process, what happens is that we have a national entrance exam, which any graduate from any discipline can take. We don't discriminate. You don't have to be only a biologist. And we actually have a lot of engineers and people from management degrees, etc. We have lots of different people take our entrance exam. The people who make the minimum criteria in that entrance exam get shortlisted. And then in addition to their exam scores, they have to submit SOPs and statements of experience in the field, from which we shortlist about 60 students for interviews. And then we do interviews, and from that we shortlist about. That is the admission process for the
Great. So a question from Prabir Sinha. You mentioned obviously the partnerships are key to the success of this program. Prabir wants to know, do you do any outreach to universities in order to tap into those highly motivated students that are already enrolled in universities?
Right. We've not done as much of it directly from our program, but I don't know if NCPS is going to talk about it in one of these sessions, but we do have, a growing outreach program where we are trying to reach out to students both in the larger university system in India and as well as in, high schools to try and engage them in science and draw them in. Yeah, but it's not so much for this particular program, if that's what you're asking.
Right. So you mentioned that a portion of the students that complete the master's program go on to do doctoral programs. Is that at NCBS, or is that mostly at other institutions? And do you follow their outcomes at all?
Could you repeat the last part, Shani?
Oh, I was just wondering if you follow their outcomes as well after they move on to get a PhD degree and move on after that.
Yes, we do follow their outcomes, and that's kind of some of the stuff that I showed you. Yes, their PhD, they go out to PhD programs all over the planet. So a few do it here and in other institutions in India, but really everywhere. So the United States, United Kingdom, Europe, Australia. I mean, they've gone out all over the world to do their PhD.
So in addition to the coursework and obviously the practical, field work that these students do, are there any other types of training opportunities offered to them within this program? More general training as far as, training in career opportunities, or, communicating science, or, managing a group of scientists? Is there any other opportunities?
Right. So 2 parts to that. Within the curriculum itself, we do have a lot of soft skills that we try to work on. So we do have a course in popular writing, we have a course in wildlife photography and wildlife video filmmaking, and so we try to also engage in a lot of these soft skills, because not everybody who comes to the program wants to engage in the field through research alone. And so we try to introduce them a little bit to that, as well as we keep our eye out for other opportunities. And if we see a conservation leadership program that's good for our students to attend, we direct them to it and see if they can attend it. And we try to, we keep our eye out for other opportunities as well and encourage our students.
Great. So a question came in from one of our audience members, Janina Sika. She said, you did a great talk, congratulations. And she's from Argentina, where the relationship between NGOs and academia is not great. And so she's wondering how you facilitate these relationships. Is it through faculty, or did the NGOs initiate? And maybe what were the hurdles in getting them established?
Okay, that's a very good question. And in India, at least, I think much of that collaboration occurs at least in part because the community in this discipline is not that huge. Okay, so there are not thousands of people who are doing wildlife biology and conservation. So it inevitably happens that a lot of the people in academia and in the NGO sectors might have intersected when they were graduate students or they've worked on projects together. So there's a very natural set of pathways by which these individuals are very likely to have been connected, which of course then means that it lubricates any future interactions between them, and the hurdle to creating those connections is greatly reduced. But I think that's really circumstantial and not a planned thing. But that does mean that it's been relatively easy for us to have these linkages. And I think it has to do with the community being smaller. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions today, but I just want to wrap up by once again thanking our speakers, Uma and Jayashree. The talks were fantastic. We really appreciate them. I also want to thank our audience today for joining us. And I put a link to the Slack channel in the chat box. If anyone has questions that were not answered by the speakers during the live seminar, please head over to Slack and you're welcome to engage with the speakers there. And last but not least, I want to mention that next week on Wednesday, we will be hearing from the Center for Life Sciences in Beijing, and specifically we will hear talks from Professors Hai Qi and Chao Tang. So please come back and join us then. Thank you.
Thank you.